I am Océane Rignault. I am an environment officer at the Director of Maritime Affairs. Today I'm going to be talking about French regulations governing shipping and pollution. I'm not only going to be talking about oil spills. In fact, I'm not going to be talking very much about oil because there are lots of other types of pollution that we address in our work. The majority of our rules stem from international legislation, which is governed by the International Maritime Organization. So here you have a diagram that shows you the different types of pollution that can affect water. There are two main conventions, Marple Convention and the Ballast Convention. In French legislation, we sometimes find the transposition of these texts more or less word for word. In the articles cited on the slide, there are some examples of that. So the Ballast Convention, a long time ago, we realized that there was contamination by what are known as invasive species or non-indigenous species. So when a ship takes on ballast water, the ship will travel from point A to point B. They will be transporting water that contains bacteria, that contains algae, and these species will then end up in another location and can potentially be invasive. So in 2004, this convention, which entered into force in 2017, was established to regulate ballast water, according to which the ballast water needs to be renewed offshore, 2,000 nautical miles offshore. And in France, we have a very large maritime area. The convention is applied to national vessels. And so there's the question of how to control this convention, which is due to come into force in France in 2024. So it was written in 2004 and didn't come into effect until 14 years later. So it needed refreshed. So during the period from 2018 to 2024, there's a transition period. Then let's enter really the heart of the subject, which is the Marple Convention. The main objective of this is to minimize ship source pollution. I'm just going to go over it really briefly in its different annexes. So the first annex, which is probably the best known, relates to oil pollution. It was established in 1992 and it requires vessels to have a double hull, oil tankers to have a double hull. The objective being to prevent oil pollution at sea. Although shipping incidents occur, that doesn't necessarily lead to amendments to this annex. Often these incidents are due to navigational incidents or errors. In November 2020, the use and transport of heavy fuel oil in the Arctic is to be prohibited. Annex 2 relates to hazardous liquid substances transported in bulk. There are around 250 substances under this annex. And the list of substances is regularly updated. In this annex, all the requirements for vessels transporting this type of substance are listed. So it governs residues, it governs discharge, that it states that a cargo log is required, and so on for this type of substance. Annex 3 is the same, but for packaged substances. So that includes flammable substances, corrosive substances, infectious substances, a whole variety of hazardous substances. So this annex outlines the requirements in terms of packaging, labeling, and so forth. Annex 4 concerns ship wastewaters. Here on the left here you have a diagram which shows the coastline and the distance from the coast in nautical miles with the applicable rules. So at 0 nautical miles, no discharge. At between 3 and 12 nautical miles, wastewater must be discharged to certified facilities, and beyond 12 nautical miles, certain discharge of wastewater is authorized if it's not disinfected. So it's quite a vast subject. And there could be the question of the obligation of ships to treat their wastewater at whatever distance from the coast. There's a study that's been launched by the Netherlands and was presented to IMO in 2019 on wastewater treatment facilities, and this study showed that many such facilities were not operational and not functioning correctly. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Annex 5, I think if I remember rightly, when I previously visited Cedre, there was work on the categorization of waste and water. So this annex defines what kind of waste can be discharged into the sea and at what distance from the coast. So that includes litter, plastic litter. Currently there's quite a lot going on around this annex, in particular relating to fishing gear, notably fishing nets and cages at sea. So there are two main advances. First, the obligation to notify the loss of fishing gear to IMO. So it's fishers' responsibility to notify these losses. So that's something that's currently in progress. We know that there's currently European regulations on this issue, but the idea is to get international regulations. So we know that the loss of fishing nets is an issue, of course, for the fishers, but also it's an issue in terms of the environment. So IMO is really focusing strongly on that issue at the moment. Annex 6 relates to atmospheric pollution from ships. And although we're talking about atmospheric pollution, that in fact has a very strong impact on water quality. So this annex focuses on 3 main types of pollutants. So first of all, greenhouse gases, then sulfur oxides, so particles, which come from ships' chimneys. So since January 2020, fuels with a maximum of 0.5% sulfur are authorized. So today that's really good progress, and is down to 0.1% in certain controlled areas. In terms of particles, they're not directly covered by Annex 6, and it's these particles that really affect water quality. Here you can see a world map. What's important to note in the region here is the question of acidification of the water. In the zone shown here, the Mediterranean from 2025 is going to be classified as a SECA zone. And there are currently discussions over it becoming a NECA and an ECA zone. A NECA zone for Mediterranean and an ECA zone for the Arctic. A quick few words about scrubbers. It's attracted quite a lot of media attention recently. Scrubbers are a kind of system that are in ships' chimneys that eliminate pollutants. It means that ships can use fuels that have a higher sulfur content than would be authorized, because the atmospheric discharge is then reduced. The reason for them using these fuels is financial, as they're less costly. This affects around 4,000 ships around the world. It's actually quite an investment to have a scrubber system. It's something that started to develop about 15 years ago. And so the idea, the problem behind these systems is that they reduce the atmospheric emissions of pollutants, but the pollutants then enter the water. So it's a real problem. So the discharge contains a lot of heavy metals, a lot of chemical additives. So the subject was addressed first by IMO in 2016. So at IMO, there seems to be, it's kind of stagnating a little bit, discussions around the issue of scrubbers. So in France, we've taken matters into our own hands and have prohibited discharge of discharge waters from scrubbers within 3 nautical miles of the coast. Next week we have a pollution prevention subcommittee meeting, and we are going to continue to try and get things to move forward together with IMO at international level. Let's move on now to subscene noise. It's an issue that's not that doesn't get a lot of attention. As mentioned by Mrs. Durand earlier, there is a descriptor 11 on subsea noise, generated by ships. At IMO, there are directives that have been established to reduce subsea noise by ships. So there's a directive from 2014. In France, at the Ministry of the Sea, there is a working group and a guide of recommendations on reducing the impact of acoustic emissions for marine fauna. At IMO, there's a correspondence group to be established on this issue. So at the moment, there are no strict regulations on this issue. Often, regulations that have been introduced are to reduce the impact of pollution on humans. And in this case, we've had to prove that the impact on cetaceans is also important. So that's quite difficult. In terms of the control of these regulations, we have shoreline coastal services with inspectors who control all these regulations. There's the Paris Memorandum of Understanding. So all the states that are party to this memorandum are involved in port state control. We have objectives that are set by Europe, but in 2021, in France, there were 1,035 inspections carried out. So here I'm not talking about oil spills, I'm just talking about infringements on regulations. When a ship is controlled and we identify a fault, then the ship must bring itself into compliance. So there is dialogue with the ship owner, with the captain. The ship needs to stay in dock until it's compliant. But most of the time, it goes fairly smoothly. When this isn't the case, then the court can be contacted, and there have been a few emblematic cases in terms of sulfur emissions and also ballast waters. So I think that's me at the end of my presentation. I tried to summarize as much as possible. You have my email address there on the screen, so please feel free to contact me with any questions. And I now hand over to our next speaker.